In 1965 in Tonga, there was a group of teenagers who decided to run away from home. Not because they were being abused or living in especially tragic circumstances. In Huakuto, Huromuza Autosaido, Ziarai Vuzu Wazu Hueari no Maruho, Asamo Ruairandone, Shoninza Sausupashi Fiku Attozatsto Taimu, Goingu to Skuru, Attendingu Chachi, Helpingu Zea Famirizu, then growing up to become fishermen like their fathers. But in your teenage years, you always feel that the world out there must be much bigger and more exciting than the place where you live. The group often talked about Fiji as if it were a magical place. They heard adults say that there were large ships there, jobs, bustling cities, and a completely different life from Tonga. In the minds of those children, Fiji was almost like a gateway to freedom. And then one night in June, they decided to actually go. The youngest was only 13 years old, the oldest about 19. None of them really knew how to plan a long sea voyage. They simply sneaked down to the harbor, stole a small fishing boat, and brought along a few bananas, some coconuts, and a small gas stove. No map, no radio, no compass. A very childish idea. But at that age, people sometimes think that if they are brave enough, everything will somehow work out. The first few hours at sea were actually quite enjoyable. The night sea was calm, the wind was gentle, and the group sat laughing and talking as if they were beginning an adventure. One of them even imagined becoming a real sailor someday. They had absolutely no sense that they had just cut themselves off from the world, until the storm arrived. And the South Pacific has a kind of weather that is very difficult to predict. During the day it can be as calm as a lake, but only a few hours later the entire ocean can become something incredibly violent. The wind came at night. The waves gradually grew higher and then suddenly became enormous. The little boat was almost lifted out of the water. In the panic, the anchor line snapped, the sail was torn apart, and the oars disappeared into the darkness. And within only a few minutes, the group realized a terrifying fact. They had no way to return home anymore. For many days afterward, the boat could do nothing but drift. At first, they still thought a ship would eventually pass by, but the ocean was too vast. The food ran out first, and the drinking water ran out not long afterward. Thirst was the worst thing. It is not like hunger. Hunger makes you weaker gradually, but thirst makes your mind begin to go mad. Their lips cracked and dried out, their tongues became stiff, and their throats burned as if on fire. A few of them began drinking seawater. They knew it was not good, but when people are that thirsty, they will almost try anything. That mistake made the situation much worse. Some began vomiting. Some lay motionless for hours under the sun. During the day, the sun scorched the wooden boat until it was impossible to touch the deck. At night, it was cold and frighteningly dark. Later, one of them said that there were moments when they truly believed the whole group would die there and no one would ever know what had happened. Then it rained in the middle of the ocean. That rainstorm felt like a miracle. The children frantically used coconut shells, clothes, and anything that could hold water to collect every possible drop. They drank until their stomachs hurt simply because they did not know when it would rain again. The rain saved their lives. Batsuto itsuto deido notsto sebuzabo tu. Onza eto sude adori huto. Wanobu zemuso ada. Kushiepu onza horizon. Attohwa stozaguru puso. To ittowazu onri akuraudo. Batto graduari zashado ubikamu. Clearer and turned into cliffs. It was Eta Island. Today, Eta is completely uninhabited. But in the past, a small community once lived there. In the 19th century, slave traders from Peru kidnapped nearly the entire population of the island. From then on, Eta was abandoned. No harbor, no ships, no visitors. A forgotten island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. As the boat approached the shore, waves began crashing hard against the cliffs. And there was no sandy beach to land on, only sharp rocks and swirling water. Eventually, the boat was smashed apart, and the group had to jump into the sea. It was a very fragile moment between life and death. Just being thrown against the cliffs once by the waves could have been enough to kill someone. But somehow, all of them managed to swim ashore. After 8 days drifting at sea, they lay stretched out on the ground like people who had just returned from the dead. The first thing the group did was search for water. No one knew what existed on the island, but fortunately they discovered a rock hollow that held rainwater. That was what helped them survive the first days. At first, life on the island was very chaotic. They were constantly hungry. Some days they managed to eat only a few seabirds. And some days they dug up roots and chewed them because they could find nothing else. They slept beneath rocks because they had not yet built a shelter. But then, after a few weeks, something rather strange began to happen. Instead of falling apart, the group gradually organized their lives. They divided the work among themselves. 2 people were responsible for the area where rainwater was collected. 2 searched for food, 2 cooked, and maintained the fire. The rest built a small shelter from branches and palm leaves. Everything happened not because anyone became the leader, but simply because they understood that if they did not cooperate, everyone would die. The most interesting thing about this story is that there was almost no violence. Later, when telling the story, they admitted that of course there were arguments. Teenager, Zustorandet on an island ho, mo azanaya, katsudonato, ruways get along. But they established a very swim pururu. If 2 people became angry with each other, they would separate for a while until they calmed down. Over time, the island began to take on the appearance of a strange home. They planted bananas and yams from what they found on the island. They kept a fire burning continuously for many months because they knew it would be very difficult to make fire again. They wove crude nets to catch birds. Every morning and evening, the entire group sang hymns. Not necessarily because they were deeply religious, but because in a place completely cut off from the world, those songs helped them maintain the feeling that their old lives still existed somewhere, that they had not been completely swallowed by the ocean. There was an accident around the middle of their time on the island. One of them fell from a cliff while catching seabirds. His leg was badly broken. Under normal circumstances, an injury like that could become a death sentence on a deserted island. But the whole group took care of him for weeks. They used wood to splint his leg, took turns helping him move around, and gave him larger portions of food. Later, the injury healed almost completely, something that many modern doctors still find hard to believe. In many other survival stories, accidents are often the moment when people begin abandoning one another to save themselves. But onata, zao positsto hapun. Minue, batsuku in Tonga, zea huamiri, zuhado aru mosto gibu appu hopu. Asumaru boto disu appearing into zao, shanyu jori hazu only, wa nendingu. Many family zuherudo fandaruzu. And their relatives believed that those children had died somewhere at sea long ago. And in reality, they should have died. 15 months passed. Atta remained alone in the ocean as if no one had ever existed there, until September 1966. That day, an Australian fishing boat named Just David passed near the island. The captain was Peter Warner, the son of a fairly well-known family in Australia. He knew about Atta and had heard superstitious stories that the island was haunted, so at first he had no intention of going near it. But then he saw smoke. Someone was lighting a fire on the island. As the ship came closer, he saw figures rushing down the cliffs and swimming straight out to sea, shouting and waving their arms frantically. At first, Peter Warner thought they were fishermen who had recently become stranded. But when he pulled them aboard, he realized something was unusual. These people had been living on the island for a very long time. Their hair had grown to their shoulders, their skin was dark and sunburned, and their clothes were almost completely torn apart. And the first question they asked was, "What year is it now?" Peter Warner later said that it was one of the strangest sights he had ever witnessed. The group looked both like survivors and like ghosts returning from the ocean. When he contacted Tonga by radio, no one believed him at first. Then each family was called. The children who had been dead for more than a year suddenly came back to life. The news spread across Tonga almost overnight. But the story did not end there. When the group returned, the police remembered that they had stolen the boat before running away, and the owner demanded compensation, and there was a possibility that the entire group would be arrested. Peter Warner thought that was completely absurd. He decided to pay the boat owner and then hired the whole group to work on his boats. Their lives changed completely from that moment on. What made the story of Atta Island famous many years later was not only the survival aspect. In fact, history contains many stories that are even harsher than this one. The special thing was the way they treated one another. In 1954, writer William Golding wrote the book Lord of the Flies about a group of boys stranded on a deserted island who gradually become violent and cruel. The book became so famous that many people saw it as the true nature of humanity when society disappears. But the story of Atta seems like a real-life answer to it. And the Tongan teenagers did not become monsters. They survived by sharing work, caring for the injured, and finding ways to keep one another sane through more than a year of isolation. Perhaps that is what makes people remember this story. In a place that was almost outside the world, what kept them alive was not only rainwater or the food they found on the island, but the fact that no one was left alone. The ocean often makes people think of loneliness, but sometimes, in the loneliest place of all, people realize how much they need one another.